After giving 500,000 migrants temporary asylum, it's safe to say that Joe Biden has just lost the 2024 election. Now available in paperback and e-readers, The Temptation of John Haynes. Give in to temptation and pick up this action-packed African-American paranormal romance. Get The Temptation of John Haynes in paperback and e-readers today. Better get the coleslaw, y'all, cause we're having us a barbecue. President Biden has given temporary protection and work permits to 472,000 Venezuelans.
Right now, let's take you out to CBS 2's Ali Bauman on Staten Island, where there's more pushback against migrants coming to the area.
For a second night, dozens of protesters rallied outside Island Shore Senior Center on Staten Island, which is now housing 15 asylum-seeking families.
We should be helping our own people first.
This demonstration was tame compared to a night earlier when 10 people were arrested, including for assaulting a police officer.
I think everyone's really angry. The migrant crisis has reached apocalyptic proportions financially for our city.
Staten Island only has 2% of the asylum seekers. And as you can see, other boroughs are doing their best to ensure that they continue supporting and being a welcoming borough.
As they rallied Wednesday, the Biden administration announced it will grant temporary protected status to Venezuelans who came to the U.S. before July 31st of this year. That will expedite work authorization for about 472,000 Venezuelans seeking asylum in the U.S., including up to 60,000 Venezuelans who have come to New York in the past year.
And the president is finally taking actions that should have been taken more than a year ago.
Congressman Richie Torres says the move is far from a silver bullet.
But even that is not a silver bullet, because the backlog of TPS applications is so overwhelming that the average processing time is about 13 months. And so in order for work authorization to be granted immediately, the president's going to have to prioritize Venezuelan migrants from New York City.
In a statement, Mayor Adams reacted in part saying, "I personally spoke to the White House tonight to hear about this development and express my gratitude." While Governor Hochul said, "After my productive conversation with President Biden last night, I'm grateful the federal government has acted so speedily to grant one of our top priorities." Hours earlier, Hochul had urged Republicans to step up.
Republicans from New York State ought to be on the phone or walk into the office of Speaker McCarthy and say, "Our state needs help."
Just this week, tens of thousands of migrants have crossed the U.S. border. The influx prompted one Texas mayor to sign an emergency declaration, while in Arizona, hundreds of migrants were detained, some in makeshift cages. Angie Ortiz fled with her 2 children from Venezuela to El Paso, crossing the Darien Gap. That's the dangerous stretch of jungle between Colombia and Panama, where an estimated 380,000 people have crossed so far this year.
Una comida al día por los niños, para los niños.
Exactamente.
In Spanish, she told CBS News' Manuel Bojorquez she's only able to feed her children 1 meal per day. As for Angie Ortiz, the temporary protected status would only apply to her if she came to the U.S. before July 31st. Here in New York, Governor Hochul said the state is prepared to start signing people up for work authorizations and get them into jobs. From Staten Island, Ali Bauman, CBS 2 News. Now, after nearly a year of Blue Party politicians like New York Mayor Eric Adams and New York Governor Kathy Hochul pleading for the Biden administration to do something about the migrant crisis that is overwhelming cities like New York, President Biden has finally decided to take action by giving 472,000 Venezuelans protected status and looking to expedite their work permits. And President Biden believes that this decision will make it look like he's doing something about the migrant crisis. However, I believe that this decision may be the thing that may cost him the 2024 presidential election and may possibly wind up costing his entire party, the House and the Senate, and many local offices. Now, as I take a critical look at the subtle politics transpiring around this announcement from President Biden to give asylum to these 472,000 Venezuelans, I see how President Biden
basically looked to play the race card as related to this entire situation. Now, Eric Adams, the black mayor of New York City, was the one complaining the loudest about being overwhelmed by these migrants. However, when it came to trying to deal with this situation, New York Governor Kathy Hochul was the first person that President Biden spoke to directly. And as New York Governor Kathy Hochul was speaking to President Biden, she basically went over the head of Eric Adams, and Eric Adams once again was basically thrown under the bus as related to this entire migrant situation and has been made into the fall guy, who is the one who's going to basically be the scapegoat for this entire situation, because he was the one who was the one speaking the loudest. And as the cream of wheat man was out here speaking the loudest and talking all of that jive about New York City being a sanctuary city and looking to try to virtue signal in order to get the attention of Joe Biden, what he's done is gone out here and been presented to be the scapegoat for the main reason why there was a disaster as related to the entire migrant crisis. And it looks like Kathy Hochul has basically gone out here and it minimized Eric Adams, and the mainstream media is also looking to minimize Eric Adams by saying that his budget cuts are not really necessary. So there's a whole campaign here by most of the members of the Blue Party to go out here and minimize Eric Adams, who is basically being set up for replacement in 2025. Now, as President Biden has announced that he's going to again give this sanctuary to these 472,000 Venezuelans, we also notice that there's a complete change in the face of the migrants that are being presented in the mainstream media. Now, as they were talking about these migrants last week and Eric Adams basically mishandling this entire crisis, from New York Governor Kathy Hochul to members of Homeland Security, the faces of the migrants that were presented in the mainstream media were mostly black Haitians and black Africans, and now magically the faces of those migrants have completely changed to become brown and white Hispanics. Now, clearly, there's a complete narrative that's being made as related to these migrants, and as this narrative is being made, clearly somebody is playing with race, because when Eric Adams was presented as mishandling the migrant crisis, the migrants became black. But now that President Biden is looking to give asylum to these 472,000 Venezuelans and expedite their work permits, all of a sudden, all of the migrants quickly become brown once again. And that should be something that most foundational black Americans should take as a complete disrespect as related to this entire migrant crisis situation. Because this entire migrant crisis situation and the way it's handled is something that should really concern foundational black Americans, because this is the latest disrespect directed at foundational black Americans who went out in the largest numbers to vote for Joe Biden in 2020. And ever since December of 2020, when Joe Biden received the presidency and became president-elect, he did not look to reward any of those black voters by giving them tangibles for giving him and the Blue Party the White House, the House, and the Senate, and a carte blanche check to provide legislation that would help foundational black Americans. No, what President Joe Biden did was go out here as when he was president-elect and not even sworn in, was bring in all the black leaders who so-called represent the black community and told them that he couldn't do anything for them. Moreover, he told them that we would need to go to the Hispanic community if we wanted to get help. And again, that was a big middle finger thrown up at all these foundational black Americans who have one of the largest economic bases of $3.3 trillion in spending power and cash in credit, and was the largest voting bloc to take their booties to the poll to preserve President Joe Biden's democracy, and instead of him showing respect for those foundational black Americans, he threw up a middle finger at them before he was even sworn in, and then went on to go out here and provide tangibles for all of these Asians as related to an anti-Asian hate crime law, then went on to go out here and look to provide all sorts of tangibles for non-citizens such as Afghans, such as Ukrainians, and now he's going out here and providing asylum temporarily for all of these Venezuelans and looking to provide them with work permits in order to get work. Meanwhile, foundational black Americans like myself, who have been out of a job, we cannot get any sort of help or support from a government that mostly foundational black Americans went out here and voted for in large numbers in 2020. And again, this is another disrespect directed at foundational black Americans as related to the Biden administration. Moreover, it is a slap in the face to many working class Americans who went and voted for Joe Biden because they wanted to get out of what they thought was Donald Trump's mismanagement of the pandemic, and also wanted to see some sort of economic relief as related to the complete disarray that the American economy had been put in as related to the pandemic. But instead of looking to help foundational black Americans and working Americans who are now struggling to deal with inflation that was created by Joe Biden's American American Rescue Plan, what many Americans are doing is they're struggling to make ends meet as they're dealing with high prices and high taxes. And instead of Joe Biden looking to put Americans first, he has now put Americans last and put foundational black Americans dead last. And what's really sad about this whole situation is that American citizens and foundational black Americans have been put dead last. Meanwhile, people like illegals who are coming in who are not citizens, Afghans who are not citizens, Ukrainians who are not citizens are being put first, and most of America's dollars are being sent out of America not to help Americans, and that money basically is being sent to everybody else to take care of everybody else but American citizens. And there has to be something to give as related to American citizens when they see illegals being brought into their country and being brought into a country that they worked out here and built, and give those illegals benefits over American citizens. Because that's what Joe Biden is doing as his so-called plan to alleviate the migrant crisis. He is looking to go out here and accelerate giving a Venezuelan a status in America over a American and a foundational black American. Moreover, he's looking to go out here and expedite their work papers in order to get them jobs, instead of trying to go out here and give many of the unemployed Americans like myself a job. And again, that is a slap in the face to the average everyday American who is struggling and living paycheck to paycheck in a country where the prices have gotten sky high, and shows how completely disconnected and detached the Biden administration is from the struggles of the average everyday American. Because when you put non-citizens over your own people, that's a recipe for disaster. And again, any smart politician would want to distance themselves from these kinds of policies, but the Biden administration and many members of the Blue Party, because they're so caught up in their feelings about Donald Trump and caught up in their obsession with trying to go out here and do two things. One, go out here and prove that they're not racist like Donald Trump, and to look to destroy black people's ability to earn. Again, both of these approaches are diametrically opposed, but it just shows the insanity of the Blue Party. How you're going out here looking to destroy a man who you say is not racist by showing how not racist you are, by supporting people who entered the country illegally, and then you want to undermine the earning power and potential of one of the strongest economic bases of which is called foundational black Americans, because the black dollar has stronger economic power. But instead of looking to support the voting bloc that supported you the most and the voting bloc's dollars that had the most economic power, what the Biden administration and members of the Blue Party want to do is believe they can go out here and replace the black voter and the black dollar, not understanding that by doing this, you're basically going out here and sawing off the branch that's been supporting you for years. And this is the whole thing that it may possibly lead to the fall of the Blue Party, because again, many of the black voters who voted for Joe Biden in 2020 are feeling deeply alienated by an administration that threw a middle finger up in their face and then allowed a lot of individuals like Afghans, Ukrainians, and now migrants from Venezuela to cut in line in front of them, even though when in 2020 they were begging black voters to take their booties to the poll, and also begging many other Americans to go to the polls because the evil Donald Trump needed to be stopped. But it's clear to me that this whole party basically has become disconnected and detached, and is now starting to show contempt for the very same people that they went out here and begged to vote for them. And again, this should be the thing that really upsets many foundational black Americans who were told that we needed to preserve democracy. Well, how are you preserving democracy when you're allowing individuals who enter the country illegally to get right in front of the people who voted for you? How are you going out here preserving democracy by taking away from listening to the people who went out here and voted for you? I mean, when you go out here and walk in front of the very same people who voted for you and tell them they need to accept people who entered the country illegally, violated our borders, and are a possible threat to national security, and we need to make them priority, that again shows just complete contempt expressed at we the people, and it's just complete contempt shown to we the people that we really need to really think critically about before you take your booty to the poll one more again, because it's clear that Blue don't care about you. Blue doesn't care about we the people. Blue went out here and again expressed contempt, especially to foundational black Americans, and Blue basically slapped foundational black Americans in the face by going out here and giving 500,000 Venezuelans this protected status and expediting their working papers. Meanwhile, there are millions of foundational black American men like myself who are out of work and can't even get in an interview from many of these companies because we run into this HR brick wall created by feminists and many of these racists. And these same racists, what they're going to do as these migrants come into the country is go out here and give jobs to those individuals, undercut wages, and as they undercut wages, this is going to undermine the spending power of the American dollar, and that should be concerning because with many of these foreign countries dropping the dollar and looking to go out here and join the BRICS currency, again, the Biden administration shows that it really doesn't have a vision to take the country down in a direction. No, what it wants to do, again, is caught up in its feelings about Donald Trump, and so caught up in their feelings about Donald Trump that they're not thinking about the state of the union and the dire state that they're putting the union in by going out here and giving a pass to all of these Venezuelans. And the irony of this entire situation is that by going out here and letting all these Venezuelans in is that Joe Biden basically is showing how racist he is, and the mainstream media is showing how racist it is, because just a week ago, they had a picture up as they denounced New York Mayor Eric Adams for his mishandling of the migrant crisis in New York. And as they had that picture, they showed black faces as the face of the migrant crisis. But when Joe Biden wants to go out here and put up his solution for the migrant crisis, what he wants to do is go out here and put up these faces of brown and white Hispanics, and again, showing me how racist those guys on the blue side are as related to the migrant crisis, and showing most black people that when it comes to Joe Biden, they made a grave mistake when they took their booties to the polls, because he went out here and told you he was going to do nothing for you. And it's a great disrespect for him to say that you need to go to a Hispanic community that is filled with illegal immigrants and go to them in order to get crumbs from their table, when you, as a full-blown citizen, were the one who put this administration in office. And again, a major league disrespect, especially to foundational black Americans, and a major disrespect to Americans. And you'd have to be dumber than a box of rocks to go out here and vote for Joe Biden or any blue candidate in 2024 after the way you have been disrespected, because this whole situation is related to handling the migrant crisis is not a solution at all. No, it's a slap in the face to American citizens who live in this country, because the solution to this migrant crisis was, one, to turn the buses back, to send this to ICE and federal officials to deal with as related to this situation, and three, end all welfare as related to individuals who are not citizens of this country, because the way you de-incentivize all of this illegal immigration is to end the freebies and end the goodies as related to these government programs. And that's the way it is in other foreign countries, because if you go to a country like Canada, Japan, or any of these other foreign countries, you just can't enter the country illegally. No, you will be arrested at that border for trespassing, and you will be arrested and sent back to your country of origin. Moreover, in those countries, if you want to work in those countries, you have to be vetted, and you also have to show that, like in Japan, there is a shortage of an individual with these skills, or you have to go out here and show you have a viable skill. But in the blue United States, there is no standard, and that's a major problem as related to immigration. And again, this just shows how out of touch Joe Biden is as related to this situation, because in the days of Ellis Island, you had to prove you had viable skills before you were let into the country. You had to be vetted and checked out. But with Biden, what he wants to do is, again, pander to the Hispanic community, thinking that he can go out here and get votes by virtue signaling. But this virtue signal is doing damage to the economy, and this decision may be the nail in the coffin for the Biden 2024 election, because you've basically alienated a lot of voters in a tough economic situation, and you've shown tone deafness to Americans who see themselves being put last in their own country. And this type of tone deafness and disconnect could be the thing that leads to Biden losing in 2024, because he's already got a low approval rating, and many of his blue associates like Eric Adams and Kathy Hochul have low approval ratings. Their handling of the economy is not seen positively as related to the inflation and the rising unemployment, with companies like Yellow going out of business and laying off 30,000 workers, companies like Google laying off 20,000 workers, companies like Disney laying off thousands of workers. We clearly have recession-type numbers, but we have Joe Biden looking to bring in more people into a country that cannot afford them, and municipalities whose tax bases are declining, and again, showing a party completely out of touch with the entire migrant situation, not understanding the way you deal with a migrant crisis and deal with people who enter the country illegally is not reward them, because all that does is incentivize more caravans of individuals to come across the border And in order to de-incentivize this type of behavior, you have to go out here and end the welfare and the free benefits, because when people see that there's no benefits coming to them and no rewards coming to them for their behavior, what they will do is stop looking to come to the U.S. and stop looking at shows like Friends, Seinfeld, and Sex and the City as some sort of dream, and realize that this whole idea of coming to somebody's country illegally is not going to get them any benefits, and the only way to get those benefits is to come to the country through proper channels, and that's what we should be encouraging. But many in America don't want to encourage this because many employers want to get cheap labor. However, that cheap labor may wind up destroying the quality of life in many cities like New York, where there's this grand plan where they believe that they can replace foundational Black Americans with many of these migrants, and they'll be able to have the same quality of life. But a critical question I have to ask is, if you're paying the migrant less than the foundational Black American, how are you going to maintain the quality of life you have today? Because if this individual is making less money and has their own community where they're spending their own money, moreover, they're sending a lot of their money overseas, how are you going to maintain that middle class lifestyle that the foundational Black American has provided you? These are the critical questions many of these individuals who come up with these plans to replace Black people don't want to think about. And again, if they took a minute to sit down and think about it, they would see how they're just basically cutting their legs right out from under them, because it was the foundational Black American whose money allows many of these foreign individuals to run businesses in Black communities and live middle-class lifestyles. It's foundational Black American dollars that allow many of these individuals who come out from migrants to open up businesses. And if you get rid of the foundational Black American from these cities, the quality of life will drop precipitously, like in my old neighborhood, Morrisania, where they got rid of all of the foundational Black Americans to bring in Dominicans and Africans, and the entire quality of life in the neighborhood went straight to hell around late 2020, and I have a whole video on that. And again, that's because they wanted to push out the foundational Black American and think they could get somebody better to replace them. And again, that's all part of what Joe Biden's plan and many of people's plan in the Blue Party is, but that plan is destined to fail, because again, when you go out here and alienate the Black voting bloc that puts you in office, you may wind up putting yourself out, because at this point, many of the foundational Black Americans who went out here and took their booties to the poll in 2020 have a plan to stay home, and they have a plan to stay home and let Joe Biden know if he wants to get help, he can go to those Afghans, he can go to those Ukrainians, he can go to those migrants. Oh wait, but they're not citizens. So this is where I say I can predict that this may be the thing that may be the end of Joe Biden in 2024 and the end of the Blue Party, because this whole thing of putting migrants before Americans, this is again a disrespect that many will not take. And again, this right here is the thing that may be the thing that alienates most voters, because they see themselves being pushed to the background and their issues being pushed to the background, and a president that's disconnected and detached from them and from the way many of these politicians were talking in that recent CBS report. Many of these people are so tone deaf they can't hear we the people, but maybe they will wake up and hear we the people on Election Day when they find themselves out of a job after disrespecting we the people for far too long. Now, if you want to pick up some of my positive Black fiction and help me be able to pay my bills, you can pick up many of my books on the SJS Direct imprint, like the ISIS series, the Steam series, the John Haynes series, the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, my Black sorority novel, The Thetas, or my vampire novel, Eternal Night. You can find all those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find them at other online booksellers like Smashwords, the iBookstore, Google Play, and Barnes & Noble. And if you'd like to see me make more videos discussing the migrant crisis, you can send a donation to my Patreon, my PayPal, or my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, 1987. Learn lessons about life and teenage love in the 1980s in this coming-of-age John Haynes story. Get your copy of John Haynes, 1987 in paperback and e-readers at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Now available in paperback and e-readers, ISIS Legacy. The sorority secrets of the goddess next door are revealed in this all-new ISIS series adventure. Get ISIS Legacy in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.